Okay, now that we've got all of our maps baked, it's time for us to go ahead and start painting our textures. And you can see this is something that I painted up, and we're going to take a look at all the different techniques that were used to make both the wood and the different metal pieces for this. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to go take the file that we had before after we got done baking, and we'll start from there and start from scratch, and I'll walk you through the different various steps. Okay, the first thing that I want to get set up is making a distinction between both wood and metal. And on your project, you might have quite a bit more to kind of separate out, and that's completely up to you how you approach your project. But in this one, I think it'll be pretty easy for us to separate out these two different material types. So the first thing I'm going to do is make two different folders. And if you go and click and add a folder here like this, I'm going to have metal sit on top, and I'm going to have wood sit on the bottom of this. Now for this, what I'm going to do for the metal is go ahead and say add a mask, and this is where you can add a white mask, which will keep everything exactly the way that you see it. If you add a black mask, it will black out or knock out everything that is within this folder. And then if you do a mask with color selection, that's what we're going to take a look at. I've never actually used the add mask with height combination, but these are the main masks that I usually use for this. So what I'm going to do is add a mask with color selection like this. And then once you do this, it's going to automatically plug in the ID mask for you. And then you're going to be able to take the color picker, and you should be able to pick colors directly on here. We're not going to be able to see anything. So what I'm going to do to make everything super obvious, I'm going to show you guys, we're going to make a new fill layer. And so if you click this fill layer, what I really like about this one is it allows you to choose just the channels you want to work with. And so if I want to only work with color, and if I wanted to make everything red, I could do that. And anytime you want, you can maybe click on something else, go somewhere else, and always come back to this and then change the color anytime you want. Photoshop has something that's called a solid color layer, and it's very similar to this. And I'm really used to working with that workflow, and I really like this workflow. What I'm going to do is call this metal, I'll just call it base, like this. And so right now it sits outside of the folder. If we click and we drag it into the folder, you can see that it's going to limit it at that point. And now it's a bit easier for us to understand and see exactly what's going on with this masking system that we've got going on here. The cool thing about the color selection is you can, anytime you can hit the negative mark, and that will subtract the mask away. And if you want to add multiple colors, you can keep pushing this out. And so I want to use all of this for the metal here. And so I'm going to keep picking all these different colors within here. And I want to get these pieces. And I also believe I kept this wood in through there. So I might end up with a little bit of a different design, and that's okay. And I was treating these as metal as well in here. And I think I'm good to go now at this point. Now you might notice some of the pieces are not all the way like, there's like a little gap there, and what we can do with that is if we want to fill that in, you can see that there's a tolerance, and you can crank up the tolerance, but we do run into an issue where if we get a little too much, it's possible that we could start picking up other colors that we don't want to pick up. So we got to be a little bit careful with that. And the other thing that I found for this is if we keep this on for metal, we might want to have the wood go over the top of the metal. And at this point, I'm going to make a new fill layer like this. I'm going to just use color. Let's just make it blue, so we can make it really obvious that we're filling with this. And I'll call this wood base like this, and I'll throw it into the wood area. And then I could also put a white mask on here, and this is what I was saying, it'll leave it exactly where it's at for this, for the mask. Now if I make this a black mask, it'll fill the entire thing up like that. And then now at that point, if I put it on bitmap mask, I'm sorry, not a bitmap mask, if I do mask with color selection, I can start to pick colors, and I'll pick everything that I see for the wood. And let's go ahead and pick this on here like that. Now I think what I'm going to get is, if this wood sits over the top, there might be some areas that it might need to bleed out a little bit more, and we can increase the tolerance on it, and maybe that'll fill that in. So maybe I'm getting a better representation this way with this. At this point, I could get rid of the color selection and just let the entire thing be filled. But right now it's filled with black. Now if I fill this with white, it's going to let all of the metal show through in here like this. And everything's contained on a group, so you can see it's, if I turn it on or off, we can show or hide that. So we're really close to getting what we want. I did crank up that tolerance, and you can see that on the side here for the metal, that it's picking this up. So the other thing is I can select this mask, and then I can go into here, and I will be able to add a paint effect right here, like this. The other thing I can do is turn on symmetry for the object, like this. And if I go ahead and paint on here, you can see I can paint out those errors that I had for this. So what I've done in combination with the color picker and just doing a little bit of painting, I've been able to separate these pieces out and get this working in a way that anything that I drop now into this folder group will just remain wood, and anything that I drop down in this metal group will retain metal. And now I have a way to close this stuff up, and I can show and hide them, right? And I can look at them individually if I want. So that's the first step. Go ahead and get that set up, and then we'll start taking a look at some other techniques, and we'll start working on the metal. So as we start painting, the one thing that I want to do is make sure that it's not too distracting to take a look at the wood while we paint the metal. So what I'm going to do is go open up the wood area, go to this wood base. I'm just going to take this color information, and I'm going to drop it down and make it a darker kind of gray color, like this. Now if I want to control the roughness value, I could turn that on, and you can see with a roughness value of 0, it's kind of like, think about glass, something like that. It's going to be nice and reflective, and it's going to have a really tight highlight. As you push it towards this direction, it becomes more of a rough surface, and as you do that, it becomes less reflective. It also reduces the amount of specularity that's going to be on it, and if you push it all the way over here, it becomes a completely and totally matte image like this. So I can go back to the base color. It might be a little bit dark if I remove all that, so I'll just maybe keep it within this range within here. You could add saturation this way too, but I'm just going to keep it somewhere in this range just so it's not too distracting to take a look at, but doesn't have a whole lot of information. So I can go ahead and close that back up. We can open this up, and then we'll go to the metal base. And here's where I want to build something for whatever I would consider the base part of my metal, and maybe we do a value of 0.25 somewhere in there. Now if it's metallic, you can turn on metal, and you can take the metallic value. A value of 0 or black is going to be non-metallic, and if you push towards 1, that's going to turn it into a metallic type of surface, right? And really, from everything I know, you really want to either be 0 or 1 with these values. If you're doing something that's a bit more stylized, you might be able to get away with pushing some values inside the middle. I have noticed if you give a value of 1 for metallic, it also kind of darkens the surface a little bit and makes it a little bit more saturated. So just something to kind of keep in mind for that. So I'm going to take this base color and I'm going to drop it down to maybe 0.15, somewhere in there. And then I'm going to turn on the roughness, and then we're going to take the roughness value, and I think I'm going to put it somewhere in here, maybe right around 0.5, like this. And again, with metallic on, you can see if we push it over here with the roughness, and there's no roughness on this thing whatsoever. It's super reflective, super shiny. So we've got a chrome surface, and then if we push it all the way till where it's matte, it's still going to be a matte surface. It has a little tiny bit of maybe sheen to it. But as we start pushing it over here in this direction, we're going to start getting some nice specular values on there. So actually, after taking a look at it and reevaluating that, maybe I'll do like 0.65, somewhere in that ballpark. Okay, so that's going to be good for just this little tiny section and getting some more predictable values on here, and then taking a look at how we can limit just that fill material with just color, roughness, and metallic, and what those values equal out to be. All right, the next thing I'm going to show you how to do is go ahead and duplicate one of these layers like this, and we can make it a little bit, let's say a little bit lighter, and we'll go ahead and make it less rough, so have a bit more reflectivity and a bit more specular component to it. And then I'll just call this metal, maybe top 1. So this is double clicking here like that. And the next thing I'm going to show you is using a bitmap mask instead of white or black or the color selection. We'll use a bitmap mask, and what that allows you to do is use any texture or alpha that you have in the program, but it also lets you use the maps that you've baked out. So we've got the ambient occlusion. It's a possibility that we could use that, and I'll show you that in a little bit. But what I want to use now is the curvature, and if you want to limit things, you can start to type. And so if I start to type the word curve, I can find the curvature map pretty easily. So I'll throw that on there. It's going to put this in a mask. What we can do is hold down Alt, and we can click on this, and it'll show you what this looks like as a mask at this point. What we can do now at this point, I'm going to go and add an effect, and I'm going to make a levels. So let's go ahead and say add levels. And what we'll be able to do is use a levels adjustment just like we have in Photoshop. So we could take the shadow or minimum input, and we can push this over here. This is our mid value, and then this is our input maximum or our high. And so we can push these and try to kind of crush the values into a certain range like this. So what I want to do is get really big differences between just some cracks like this. And then this is if you want to lessen the entire effect of the whole thing on the bottom, you can do that, and that'll make that pure white. And if you want to make it black, you can take this and start dragging it. So it's almost like an opacity slider for the values that you see on top. I'm just going to leave this alone and maybe bring these in just a little bit like that. And now to see this thing and see where it's at right here, you just have to click on this little square icon like this. And you can see already we're starting to get a pretty nice difference between the surface. And just alone with what we've sculpted, just by using this curvature map, you can see that we're starting to get some pretty nice and pretty cool looking details going on for that. So the other thing that we can do with this mask is we can right click it on it, and we can say invert mask. And so if you wanted to go the opposite direction and you wanted the majority of this to be this lighter thing on top, you can invert the mask. And at any point you can always go back and you can invert the mask. If you don't want to see it, we can toggle the mask off like this, and then we can click it again to bring it back. Let's right click on there and see what else they have on here. We have invert mask background, and I haven't actually used that one before. I usually just use the invert mask, and if we clear the mask, it's obviously going to clear the mask out for us like that. So that's an easy way for you to be able to take your sculptural detail, put this filter on there, and then you're starting to get a nice difference between the two materials that we're starting to create. And this is what I like to do whenever I first start this thing off. I like to give myself a base material, and then I like to give myself some kind of difference. Now, if that is too strong, the cool thing about the fill layers is that we can always go back to this. We can always change the color, so we could tint this towards something if we wanted to make this like a reddish color, green. So we're starting to maybe make it feel like rusted metal or something like that, or maybe it's got some aging on it. So it's going to allow you to kind of push through this like this. If I was going to tint it towards something, I might tint it a little bit towards red or orange in there, and then just back off the saturation and maybe drag up the level just a little bit like that within there. And then again, remember, we have the ability to control whether or not we have metallic going on for this, like we see here, or we've got the roughness value that we can kind of start to play around with. And I think I'm not going to change the roughness value too much on this. I don't want it to get too shiny on me already right now like this. The one thing I did notice is as we drag this metallic slider on here, it's starting to show up on the wood that we have at the top too. So that's a little bit concerning. So what I did to fix that problem is I actually went to the mask area for the metallic, and what I did, let's just go ahead and get rid of this. What I did for that was added a color selection, and then just pick the colors of the wood, just like we did for the wood part, like this. And we could take the tolerance and then drag it up just a little bit. I think I picked the wheels too, like that. And then we just need the invert of that mask, so we can invert the mask like that. And then now we've masked out just this area. And then now we've got the metal showing up in just the metal area, and then we've got the wood, and then the wood still sits over the top of that. And let's just check this and make sure nothing funny is happening with the metallic values. So we can crank the metallic values of these things like this, and we can take the metallic value of this and change that, and it shouldn't be affecting the wood at all. So we've been able to solve this issue where for some reason the metallic values were bleeding through and it was showing on the wood area. Okay, what I'm going to show you now is basically what we did before, where we're going to pull out some details, maybe use the curvature mask, and this time we're going to add a little bit of a twist to it. We're going to be able to block everything out after we're done, and then just paint in specific areas that we really want to pull detail out in. So I'm going to open this up, and I'm going to put this in the area with the other metal that we have. Now, what is possible is if we just take this metal top one, if we've already got some kind of setup, we can just right click on there and say duplicate layers like this, and it should give us everything that we have going on with the mask and everything. Now at this point, what I can do, I'm going to go back to the solid color layer, actually the fill layer, and we're going to just kind of, I'm going to bump this up like this in this area. I want to make this even less rough, so it's more more shiny, kind of like this, right? And it's producing a really cool kind of look. Let me drag that down even further like this. But I want a little bit more control on this. The other thing, I'll just, since I did a copy of that, I'll just change the name to 2, like that. And the other thing is, I'm going to take a look at the levels that we got going on here and see if I adjust this and then crank this up a bit more, if I can tighten that up a bit. Okay, so I think I'm pretty good with that. Now the next thing I want to do, I want to show you that we can do nested folders inside of folders. And if we do that, I can make a new folder, and I'll call this metal top 2. So we can keep it the same exact name. And now I can throw this inside this folder, and then I can just fill this with a black mask and it will get rid of everything, just like that. And then now I can paint into this mask. I'll do add an effect, and then just do add paint like this. And then now I can go to my brushes, and we got a lot of different options for what we could do for brushes. The most basic stuff is like a basic hard brush or a soft brush, and so like the soft brush is kind of just like an airbrush. Now if you hold down Control and you right click, you can increase or decrease the brush size, and if you're moving left and right, that'll do that. If you hold down Control and then move up and down, that will control the hardness and softness of that. So I'll have the brush nice and large, and then I want to be painting with white. Now as you paint, you can see down here, here's our size, here's our minimum size. We got flow, which is kind of like opacity or the strength of this. And then if we drag down, we should be able to see the different color that we have on here, right? And here's hardness of this, of the alpha shape. So I could drag that all the way down. Now, just like in Photoshop, if you paint on here and you paint this, right? What we can do is tap X, and we can do the opposite color. So we're painting into this black and white mask like we are, and we're just painting either black or white on there. Now, one thing that I think is happening right here, you can tell that this the size is getting, like, if I do a little bit of pressure on there, it's making a really small brush stroke. I'll hit undo for that. If I turn this off, then now at that point it's not going to do any pressure sensitivity for size. Now it's going to really throw that on there pretty darn strong. So I'm going to hit undo to get that back. Now at that point, I might want to take this and then tone down the flow and make it really, really low. And again, Control, right click, left drag, and that'll make it a little bit smaller. And let's see where we're at now with being able to paint some of this on. So it's pretty good. I still want to make the size smaller, so I'll do Control, right click, and make it a bit smaller, like this. And so then I'll just go ahead and paint this in particular areas. And then maybe I want to hit and highlight some of the design work that is on here. Maybe hit some specific edges on here. Now if it's easier for you just to drag over here and do it on the interface, no big deal for that, right? Now I would say Substance Painter, at least right now, the way that it is, it can be pretty intensive on your graphics card. And the whole painting experience is probably not the best as far as what I would be used to inside of Photoshop. So it doesn't feel like I can actually paint in here. So if I had to do hand painted stuff, that might be a little bit more challenging, but we could make materials that aren't quite as complex, and maybe it would be a little bit easier to do that. But right now, I think the power of all this is that you're able to paint with these multiple channels, and you're able to paint on everything all at the same time. So that's a really powerful thing. So that's, to me, the kind of the coolness factor for using this program. And if you're going to push this into UE4, like what we're going to do, the results that you see here are going to match pretty closely to what you get inside of UE4. You might have to tweak things a little bit, but the results are going to be pretty good. So I'm just trying to think of it like this area is getting hit a bit more, and maybe they're getting scratched and worn off a bit more in particular areas, and getting rubbed, and maybe that's exposing more of the base metal on this thing. And so that's kind of the thinking behind some of this, right? I'll just hit these edges a little bit more. Okay, and so I could definitely keep going on this for quite a bit, but I'm going to go ahead and just end this little part of the video. It's up to you how far you want to push this area and kind of what you want to do as far as telling a story on there. But this is how we can use the maps to our advantage and then set things up in a what you would call a non-destructive way of doing things. Because we still have this information down here and we're painting into this mask, so it's not affecting any of this stuff that we may have painted underneath of it. We're just revealing parts of it or hiding parts of it. So it's actually a very it's a very powerful way to work. So you're getting some of the benefits of a non-destructive workflow, but you're still having the artistic input to be able to hand paint some of this stuff like this. So what I'm going to talk to you about now is we're going to add a little bit more punch to our shapes by taking the ambient occlusion map. Remember, the ambient occlusion map is the map that was generated that simulates how light goes and falls into the recesses of cracks and looks at distance between two different objects and then makes a black and white map based off of that. So we're going to add a darkening effect to our metal. Some people would say this is wrong because it's basically taking lighting information and baking it down into the color texture. But I think what we're kind of working on right here is probably something that's a bit more like hyper realistic, so it's not completely totally physically accurate or anything like that. So I kind of want to visually make something that I think looks appealing. So I think it's okay to add the AO pass on here for this. What I'm going to do is always have this layer sit at the top. Now I know I'm going to do more to the metal to keep working on it and show you a few other things that we can do to keep working on this to improve the look. So you could save this step for the very last part if you want, but I think it's kind of cool to start seeing it even now at this point where you can start to see some of the shapes kind of punched out. So to do this, I'm just going to make myself a folder group right here like this. So I'm going to add a folder and I'm going to call this metal and AO like that. And then this just sits at the very top of the folder group that we made for metal. And then I'm going to make myself a new fill layer and I'm going to drag it into the metal AO right away just so it's kind of already in there. So let's drag it in here. And I'll still call this metal AO. I can just put a 1 just in case we need to do multiple things on here. So I'm going to turn off everything except for, I'll leave the roughness in the metal and we'll take a look at what we got going on here for this. So if you just darken things by black, it kind of can make things look a little bit muddy, and that's not necessarily what we want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce a little bit of color to things. So I'm going to actually maybe make a slight purple color, and I'll not make it too saturated, just add a little bit of color information to it, and I'll make it maybe about this range right in here. And so the other thing I can do is if I turn on roughness, I'll make this very rough like this in this area. You can do full roughness if you want. And if I wanted it to be more saturated and darker, then I would play with metallic on here and I could tone the metallic back. Now I could just leave it at 0 full black as well. What I'm going to do is change the blending mode of this from normal, and this is just like the blending modes that you have inside of Photoshop. So there's not enough time to really explain all the different blending modes and what they do. Usually they're going to either kind of darken something or lighten things in a particular way. So to darken things, I use multiply. So if I set this on multiply on this, and I take this folder and instead of being on normal, I'll put it on pass through. It'll pass all the information through for this folder down into this thing. I do know this folder here, maybe that's kind of why we had to fix up some of the masking stuff that we had on there. Maybe because that was on normal, not pass through, but it's kind of a little bit late to be worried too much about that. So we're passing this through. Now you can see just how much darker this thing is becoming. If we wanted to add a bit more saturation to it, we could do that. If we push it up in this direction, it's going to get obviously lighter and more saturated. And if we pull down here, it's going to be darker and a lot more saturated. And if we pull this direction, it's going to get a little bit lighter. So I think something in this range should be good for us. Okay. So the other thing is, if we do this non-destructive kind of workflow, we could put the AO onto this purple here, and then we could completely knock out this folder group, just like what we looked at before, and then we could paint in and out particular areas that we like or do not like. So that's a possibility for us. So I think that's probably the right way to go. Let's go ahead and let's go to the masking area. We'll do a bitmap mask. And instead of doing a curvature, this time we'll just do AO, which is at the very beginning. It's an ambient occlusion map. And so once we throw that on there, you can see the way that this bakes. I'm going to hold down Alt and click on the mask so we can see the AO map. So I think it's a really cool map, actually, right? But we need the inverse of that. So I'm going to click back over here, click back on the mask, and then just right click on the mask and say invert mask. And then so now if we turn the metal AO on and off, you can see this change that we have. The other thing is it should add a levels adjustment for you automatically. Now if it doesn't, you can always go up here to the add effects area and you can add a new levels adjustment. But since we have a levels adjustment, we can take this and we can play around with that. And I like to look at the mask, so I'll hold down Alt again and then just look at the mask as we kind of tweak this thing out like that. So I'm just broadening the range for what we would see with the AO on there like that. So that's pretty wide. I'll click back on there and then just click levels. And so I like to just maybe just turn this on and off and kind of see where we're at with things. Now you can see that was this layer is actually overriding the roughness and the metallic parts that we have. I don't really like that. We really don't need metallic and roughness for this. I just want to use it as a darkening effect. So you do have the ability to kind of change this stuff, but I don't think it's quite what I'm looking for here. So now we can see the levels and kind of play around with that a little bit more and kind of darken that up a bit more. Now if you remember, we can take the spectrum over here and we could darken the whole thing up, or we could use this almost as an opacity mask to kind of slide this back and then kind of lessen that a little bit. Now the other thing is if you really like the amount that is kind of pulling in here, and this looks pretty nice to me, it's a bit dark in these recesses, so I can go back to the purple color, and this is again why I love these fill layers that they have. Again, just like Photoshop, I'm just used to Photoshop and their solid color layers. Any point we can go back and we can change this information, and we can make it more saturated, and we can drop that back, or we can make it a bit lighter to kind of ease that off a little, because it feels a bit strong to me. So I'll just kind of find some sweet spot in there, kind of like this, and it might be a little bit too saturated, so I'll pull that off just a little bit in there. Now if you like, let's just say we like where we're at with this. Let's say I like some of the purple that's happening up in here in this area, but I don't like how dark it is down here on the bottom. If we're happy with what we've got up here and we're good with that, but we want to lessen this is what I was talking to you about, where we can paint into this if we throw a mask on here. So this AO sits in this folder group. We've done all the work for the AO mask here on this fill layer, and then now we've got this group that we have, and it opens up the possibility for us to put a mask on there. So I'll just put a white mask on there, so nothing changes and everything stays exactly the same. And then now we can go back to our brush, and we can go back to our soft brush, and then we can start to paint some of this out. Now we do want to paint with black because we've got a white mask on there and we want to hide this, so we got to paint black into it. So it looks like we're good to go. So we can start to paint this. I'm just barely tapping on this, right? So just ever so slightly and lightly tapping on here. So again, it doesn't really feel too crazy like I'm really painting, but it's a pretty easy setup, and it's going to give me the results that I'm looking for currently right now. And that's really all that matters. And if I take away too much, I can tap X and then paint with white, and we can just lightly brush on through there again. And maybe this is a little bit too strong right there for my liking, and maybe just a little bit too strong here. And so we have that. And if you thought maybe this is a little bit too strong and through here for some of this, we can start to knock that back as well. And again, all this sits directly on top of everything. So whatever we put down below will be able to still have this darkening effect over everything that we put down below it. So it becomes something pretty powerful to use at that point. In this part, we're going to be taking a look at very similar techniques than what we've just previously done. But this time we're going to add some larger color swatches or larger areas of color to our map. And we're going to do that with a combination of painting and also maybe the color selection tool. So we've already talked about the AO. We can make sure that sits on top. I'm going to make a new folder group and then call this maybe secondary colors, like this. And then I'm going to go make a new fill layer, and I'll just do an abbreviation real quick for that. I'll throw this into here, so I just clicked it and grabbed it within there. So it's in there, and this time I only want color right now, and we're going to check this out. I think I want to add maybe a slight reddish tone to it. So we could just add color this way. We could also use the multiply mode like we just did before. So if we multiply and we put this to pass through, you can see that we could darken it up pretty easily, but if we just slightly tint it towards something, we could get something going on within here like that. Now, if we wanted to lighten something, we could do something like a screen, or we could do a color burn. So if we have it on screen, it's gonna lighten, but you're gonna need quite a bit more saturation on there for that. So just depending on how you want to do that, if we did something like color burn, that's a darkening, could be a darkening kind of effect on things like that, and that's extremely strong at that point. So just a little bit of value and a little bit of color, you can see how quickly and how much that changes. So there's color burn. If you do linear burn, it doesn't look like it's much different, but it's another mode of getting some color on there, but it's pretty intense at that point. I think I might just use screen. Overlay is another one where if you start off with just mid gray, then it doesn't do anything to it. And if you push a little bit of saturation, you're going to add a little bit of saturation. If you push it lighter, it's going to get lighter. And if you push it darker, it's going to get darker. So overlay gives you quite a bit of control for things, for adding some color information to it. So you choose the method that you want. The method doesn't necessarily matter. It's depending on the look that you're kind of going for on this. So I'll leave it where it's at for this. And then what I will do is this, because I want the control to be able to paint in and out this stuff if I don't like it. I'm going to add like the masking directly onto this fill layer here. So to make things really easy to see, I think I'm going to make it quite a bit darker just as we get things set up. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll make a mask, and I'll do a mask with color selection, and I'll go ahead and pick colors. And this is where you have to do a little bit of pre-planning inside of ZBrush, right? Inside of your sculpt. If you know that you want to do certain rings to have certain colors and things like that, then you're going to have to already kind of pre-plan for that. So I think I want to get this a bit darker. I think what I'm going to end up doing when I'm done is I'm going to have some of these parts a bit darker than others. So I think I'll make the wheels a bit darker. Actually, that's the outer part, so didn't need that one. I'll pick this, and I'm kind of thinking maybe I'll do the inner part like that. So I think that's going to be good. I just want to move to the front real quick and then see if there was a ring inside of there. So that's already kind of selected for that. So I think I'm good to go on everything on there. So now that I've got that kind of done, again, if we're just adding some color, we can just kind of lightly tint this thing. I could drop this thing back down like this. What I really want to do is I think I'm just looking for maybe a value change within here, and I might actually want to go lighter. This is where you can kind of play around with this a little bit and see what resonates with you. And I think this is pretty good. And through here, I don't want it to be too strong. So I think I'm going to leave it something like this. And then now what I was saying, this gives me the ability to come in here with a white mask. And then if I paint into that white mask, and I've got my soft brush, again, I'm not doing anything crazy with painting on this, I can come through and I can lighten this up. So I'm just doing the bracket keys left and right, and it's right next to the backspace key, like down below that just a little bit. So you can increase or decrease your brush size that way too. So a lot of the same functionality that you would find inside of Photoshop for increasing, decreasing brush size exists within there. So I might also want it to be a little bit lighter towards the top, as the sun maybe was going to hit that. So I'm just kind of lightly painting this stuff out just a little bit, so it feels maybe like the metal's a little bit more worn. The other thing is that we could do with this, if we put it on roughness, we could make that area more shiny if we wanted to, like this. So you do still have the possibility of doing this, and I can put this on metallic, and it would be full metallic in through here. So if you wanted to change the look that way, it's possible for you. So I just want you to remember that that's available to you. I'm not the biggest fan of this, so I think I'll just take off the roughness on here and just leave that off. And I'll go ahead and take the metallic off. The metallic's not changing because the metallic value underneath it was full metallic at that point. And again, if you want to add a little bit of color to this, we could do this. I haven't really tried other color combinations, so this is where I think this becomes a cool workflow where we could just use the slider and we could slide through the different color values and see what we might want to build with the colors, right? And so doing stuff that's just way too saturated is going to be really pushing us away from maybe some of the realism, unless you found something that, you know, you're trying to emulate, some kind of reference that you found that has that specific color. It's not necessarily going to work so well for that. I didn't put on here with the color selection, I could pick this as a darker element too if I wanted to have that kind of stand out a little bit for us. That's a possibility as well. And I think I'm going to do something different on this part here, but I'll just go ahead and just select it for now, just so we can add some of that to that right there. So I think that looks pretty cool. The only thing that I would maybe do a little bit different on here is paint into this and paint that a little bit lighter right there. So I was just checking it and making sure it's actually painting this out. So if you want to rotate the light, I didn't really talk to you about this. If you shift right click, we can rotate the light around, and that becomes pretty important for you to check how specularity falls across the surface and how it's reacting to light. So if it's in darkness, obviously it's going to look quite a bit different in these different vantage points and stuff. So definitely something you want to check as you move around the object. So I want to do this. And we do have our cameras still from the earlier section, so if you wanted to use any of the camera data to kind of check this out, that could be kind of a cool way to check your work. And I think things are looking pretty good. So I'll put this back on the default camera and then just save this, and then we can keep moving forward with what we're painting on this. All right, in this part, we're going to be taking a look at, again, very similar workflows, making a folder group. This time we're going to make a smart material, and we're going to throw that inside of there, and then we're going to have some control over that. So we're going to make a new folder group. We'll call this gold. I think we'll try to find a gold material. And then if we go over to this area here, there's smart materials. Smart materials are these materials that come preloaded with the program. They're very, very cool, very powerful. Most of the smart materials have a lot of different settings that you could throw on to the smart material so you can tweak them. And some of them have been built in Substance Designer, and that's where the control for this stuff is actually built. So I just drug that directly in there, and you can see we've got gold directly on there. If we open up this smart material, it's a folder group, and if we scroll down on here, you can see here's all the different elements that go into that. So it's possible for you to do just what we were doing before, where we could change the height information, color, normal, roughness, all that. But if we wanted this gold to be a bit darker or lighter or more, have a little bit more orange in it, whatever that is, you have access to that and you can control that. So I won't get too in deep into this, because you would really want to try to play around with this and then kind of tweak it. If you're happy with what they have, then that's fine, but most of the time you're wanting to maybe change things slightly or manipulate them in some kind of way. So I'm going to go ahead and close that part up. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave this top one open so we can always put a mask on there. We can paint in and out stuff if we want to. So I'm going to go to this gold armor, the folder that it's actually coming in with this smart material that we have here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this mask, and I'm going to do mask with color selection. So we could use all the different methods that we've looked at before. I'm going to use this one, and I'm going to pick a color, and I wanted to use this orange that we have here. And I wanted to soften this up and see if I could make this bleed out a little bit more. And if I tweak the tolerance, I was just trying to see if I could get this to bleed out just a little bit more. So I think that's fine for where it's at. So we've got it on both sides, and you can see that this thing has got a lot of information on it, especially even if it goes into dark, because of how much I think reflectivity is going on that. So that's a really, really strong element. And so I might want to be careful with that. As I think about this, I might want to put this on this detail, maybe some of these details, like it's a gold leaf, and I've kind of brushed that on. So as I do that, I think maybe what I need to do is approach this a little bit different. So I think what I'm going to do at this point is get rid of the color selection. Uh, so again, it's going to be that's going to turn that into a black mask. We can just make that into a white mask, or we can do the add bitmap mask. And let's just do curvature. So I'll just type in CUR to find the curvature map, and then we'll throw that on there. And then let's put add an effect to it, and let's just do levels. And then let's crush the values so we start to get this only showing up in the higher kind of areas on this, like this. Now remember, we have the ability to do this with this value, and we have the ability to do this with this value. So we can lessen the overall effect on this quite a bit if we want. So it's not exactly killing everything the way that I was kind of hoping for. So I guess I'll just leave it with you know, fairly strong within there. So I'm going to close this up. The next thing is I only want it to show up in particular areas where I paint. So this time, instead of filling with a white mask, I'm going to fill with a black mask. So it's going to kill everything. And then now we can go in with our brush and we can start painting. This time, there is this bark texture. There's a lot of different textures in here that you could use. I do like this bark texture if I want something that's a bit more random. And then I can paint within there, and I'll paint into that white. And then now at this point, I'll do shift right click to move the light around. And then we can start to just kind of lightly paint this in. And I'll use my bracket keys to make the brush size a little bit smaller. So now at this point, I'm able to hit certain edges that I want to emphasize. And maybe I want to emphasize some of this. So really it's just revealing what was down below. So we've got multiple layers of masking going on. And so it's already picking up a lot of the edges and things like that. And now I've got artistic control to say exactly where I want this this color to kind of fall within there. So I'm not super happy with this part here. So I'll just keep brushing some of this on in these areas like this. And I kind of like these gold, these to be kind of covered in gold right in here. And I could hit some of these details right in through here. Like that. Maybe hitting through there. And so really it's up to you, like with your artistic eye and kind of where you want to place these things, where you'd want that to be. I know this is like a bit crazy if we're actually doing gold leaf on wheels and things like that, but if it ends up having kind of a unique look, then that could potentially be worth it. And I think I'm just going to try to add a little bit of gold in through here and here, like this, just like that. Okay, and so I think that's pretty good. I'm just going to rotate this into place and then just take a look at it right there and through here. And let's just go ahead and save that, and I think that'll work for this particular part. Okay, in this little section here, what we're going to take a look at is adding some height information. So we're able to take the curvature map, and I'm going to turn this on and off just so you can kind of see what's going on here. Just take a look in this area and some of these other areas where I was able to selectively paint in and add a little bit more detail, and that was all based off of what was baked out with the curvature map. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this off and show you everything that I created for this. It's pretty simple. we're just going to do the same kind of process what we did before. So I'll make a new folder group, call this height, like this, and we're going to make a new fill layer, and we'll call this height, like this, and we'll throw it into the folder. And then at this point, the only thing that I need is the height information. Now I'll make this pretty strong. I'll make it like 0.5. I know that it would seem like you put something like this is going to be really strong, but really these smaller numbers are going to equal out to be quite a bit whenever we throw this actually on here. So we have that. What we're going to do now is limit this with a bitmap mask, and we're going to go ahead and find the curvature mask. So we'll type in CUR and just find the curvature map, and you can see what it's going to do for us. So it's going to give us this really nice crunchy kind of detail, and it's based off, again, that height map. Now we're going to do a layer effect, and we'll do levels. And if we want to kind of isolate this and kind of try to find a range that's even more for us, like we could do this. That's going to give us a whole lot more information. So it's really where you want to find it. I want to go ahead and just leave it at this level right here, like this. So the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put this back on this paths through for the top folder group that we just put this inside of. And at that point, what I'm going to do is go ahead and put a black mask on here. And that's going to knock everything out. And then at that point, we can paint some of this in. Let's just do add a white mask on it real quick. This is really, really strong. So what we can do is drop this down even further. So we could do something like this if we want, right? And I really like how it's pulling out all the detail of this right in here. I like how it's adding the detail in there, but there's only certain areas where I really, really want to keep this. So I'm just going to go ahead and fill this with the black mask, and then we're going to go ahead and we'll paint into the mask with our brushes. Let's go find our brushes, and we'll go back to the basic soft again, and we're going to turn off the size of the pen pressure like this, and I'm going to take the flow and put it down really, really low, like this. And I'm trying to remember if I could. I know we can export this out for this brush, but there is a way that we can actually store this information. So it is possible that you can right click on this area, and you can say you can create a new tool preset, or you can create a new brush preset. And if you do either one of those, it's going to take the brush and it should throw it down towards the bottom of this. Actually put mine right here, and after that you can actually change the name of that if you want, and start to build up your own area where you're keeping your own brushes. So that's one way that you could get to it and do it that way. So I'm just going to go ahead and start to brush in some of this information. And again, I just want to pull out, I really wanted to emphasize some of this line work that I have on here, and I didn't want to get too strong with it. And I want to emphasize a little bit more of the detail work that was put on here, like this. This is still pretty strong. I really liked some of the details that were kind of sculpted in here, so I want to pull out some of this like aging. I want to emphasize maybe this a little bit stronger, and I want to emphasize this a bit more, and then I'll just rotate around and kind of pull out these parts, maybe the line work that's on here. So again, it's any area that you want to really kind of pull out and add up the strength of maybe what was there for the normal map. It's possible for you to go ahead and do that. And so I'll just like try to emphasize some of these cracks on here, and maybe a little bit of this detail in here. And let's see if I put that in here, maybe kind of pull that out just a little bit, and then emphasize this. And then now you've got something that will allow you to just turn on and off that detail and see those specific changes. So I'm going to go ahead and keep it right there like that. And I think I'm pretty satisfied with what we got there. So go ahead and leave it there. And that's a way that you can take your curvature information, turn it into height information, and then add that to what you got going on detail wise. Okay, now what we're going to work on is adding some specific discoloration. So you can see on here I've got some areas that feels like maybe some of the metal's been knocked out, and I want to add this and make it a different color. So we're going to use a technique that's very similar to what we did before for adding this color area in here. So I'm just going to make a new folder group, call it discolor, like this, and then I'm going to go ahead and make a new fill layer and call this discolor. Let's throw it inside of there. Let's take the folder group and set it to pass through. I'm going to put this and set it to multiply, and so this should make it darker. What I can do is take the metal, I'll keep the metal and the roughness, and we could try height too. I might take the height and just put this down really low, so 0.01. So not very much. Roughness, I might take this and put it here, take the metallic and really drag it up like this. And since it's on multiply, I'm only going to make it just a little bit darker. Let's take the roughness now, and I'm going to drag it right up into here, somewhere like that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to take this. If I want to be as non-destructive as possible, I could go on here and say add a black mask to knock everything out. And then this time, if I wanted to use basic hard, if I am going to make the brush size smaller, control right click, and I should be able to start drawing with this on here like this. And this is going to help us to understand what it is exactly that we're building. So I'm just painting into this with a mask at this point, and it's kind of hard to see exactly everything that we're painting. So what I think I should do is probably make this maybe a little bit more matte like this. I think the height information is fine. I really don't need much change in height, but I think I would like it to be a bit darker like this within here. So this is my idea for what this could potentially look like and how it could be kind of cool. So I'm going to alt right click to zoom in, and then maybe I paint a little hole there and just kind of following what's already been sculpted in this particular area. Now if I want to get down in here, I might need to obviously move the camera position like this. So I would say about the only disappointing part at the time of making this video is the current version of Substance Painter. I don't have an easy way to hide everything with the model and just paint on this particular area, because I'd really like to just paint on just the cannon barrel itself. Now there are some visual tricks that I can do to actually hide everything else except for the cannon barrel, but just because they're hidden doesn't mean it's not affected by the paint that I'm doing right now. So hopefully in future versions that's not going to be an issue, and it's going to be really easy to turn on and off sections. Now we talked at an earlier point in the video about texture sets, and if we had texture sets we can turn on and off texture sets. The disadvantage currently with that system is that you can't paint across texture sets if you want to, because I think the ultimate thing would be you'd want to have texture sets, you'd want to be able to paint across those texture sets, turn them on and off with the visibility. So it's just the functionality is not quite there yet. So something else that we didn't exactly talk about is the fact that Substance Painter is recording all these paint strokes that we're doing. So the cool thing about it is if we go through and we were to change our UV information, we can always come back and update that. If we changed our mesh, even if it's in a similar place, since it's storing all the brush strokes that we're doing, you can come back at a later time and you can re-update the mesh and the UVs, and all this painting is non-destructive in that way, where it will project back onto this new model. And so that's actually a really powerful thing, especially if you want to iterate on your design and you want to iterate on your topology and all the parts that make this thing up. That's a powerful thing, but it's left the program in this state where I think they've got this kind of difficult problem to solve for how do you keep that particular system and how do you keep that working in a way that you can still update everything and then be able to show and hide the parts and stuff like that. So I'm not 100% sure on all that, but I'm pretty sure that that's the main reasoning behind why you can and can't do certain things. So it might be a little bit frustrating, and on other programs it's definitely easier to show and hide your parts. But with a little pre-planning, you can get the best of everything that you're kind of looking for. Now, the other thing is, if you do multiple texture sets, it's possible that you can spit out all the maps when you're done and you can combine them together. Now, that is definitely some work, and some people have tried to make some plugins for that. So I think that's probably another area of the program that you'll probably see in the future, at least for a way to work, is being able to maybe work with multiple texture sets and then combine the results of that together pretty easily. So that's maybe one of the only really big drawbacks that I see. So we could definitely spend a whole lot of time on this part of the process. I'm not going to do too much more painting on this, but I think you see what we're doing and what the possibilities are for this. Now, the only thing I would say is if we want to do this non-destructive thing, we could paint all the shape for this, and then at the top we could go and make a white mask, and that's not going to change anything at all. Obviously, we could paint into the white mask, and we could remove parts and do that if we wanted. The other thing we could do is if we go here and add an effect, and if you do add a levels, we could drop down the entire opacity of this entire thing by just taking the bottom part of the levels and adjusting that down like that. So what I want to do is make sure I'm not too heavy-handed with this, and I can kind of see these results as I kind of push the model back and move it far away. And so if we crank that up, that's really, really obvious. And then maybe I want to be somewhere in this vicinity. So one thing that's kind of really cool about working this way is you could, let's say you're an art director comes by and he takes a look at the work that you're doing, and the art director is like, I really wish this area was just a little bit darker or the different color or something like that. And you're like, not a big deal. I can go ahead and I can fix that up for you. So being able to work in this way, in a non-destructive way, is definitely a very, very powerful system that you could use. So if you work in that way, it's going to keep yourself as flexible as possible. So I'm going to end this part, and I'm just going to keep painting on this a little bit, and then we'll go on to the next section. All right, in this part, we're going to be taking a look at how we can add a generator. The generators are really, really powerful, and it's kind of what Substance is known for. I know I'm not really kind of using them so far, so we're trying to utilize the maps and everything like that. But what I'm going to do is we'll just make a new folder. We'll just call this Gen 1 for maybe generator 1. And then what I'm going to do is do the same thing we've been doing before. We're going to make a new fill layer. So I'll go ahead and create that, and I'll put this in the Gen 1 area, and I'll just call this Gen 1 2. And what I'm going to do for this is just get roughness and color. Let's see, I'm going to make this fully metallic, and we're going to take the roughness and we're going to drop it drop it down really far like this, and then I'm going to take the color component of that and then maybe put it right in here. My plan is to use one of the generators on here and try to get some really nice edges. So if we go to the effects area at the very top, we can say add generator, and we could pick from here generator, and there's a lot of different stuff that we can take a look at. So let's see. The one that I probably want to just use is this default one that's kind of a metal edgeware. They've got a lot of different stuff for making your own custom mask and things like that. They've got some other generators on here for like dirt, and so there's lots to explore and play around with. But the very first one, let's just take a look at this metal edgeware. And once we throw this thing on, then it's going to go through, and it's kind of like a smart material if you think about it that way. But if we take a look at this, we've got this thing here, and so after we've got this set up, we're going to go ahead and just make a black mask to knock this entire thing out. And then we're going to go and add a generator. So with our generators, they've got lots of different generators within here. A little bit later, we'll take a look at a 3D distance node, and that'll use the position node where we can do some gradients and things like that. They've got dirt. They've even got their own way to make a masking system. So there's lots of tons of different control on there. I'm going to use this metal edgeware, and then this one just really helps you determine and pick up edges, right? And so if you take a look at, if we hold an Alt and click on the mask, you can see this is the mask that it's generating for us based off of that. If we come in here, the cool thing about it is if we select this mask and then go to metal edgeware after it's been applied, we've got a lot of different stuff. It's kind of like a smart material at that point, where we've got this wear level, and you can play around with the amount of wear and tear that's on the object itself. You got wear contrast. So there's just a lot. There's a lot there in terms of what you could play with on here. So if I take this contrast up and then take the wear level down, then we're not getting too much. I'm just really trying to pick up some like nice edges on here that we can kind of play around with. And then when I'm done with this, we'll make a mask on top of here, and then we'll go ahead and start painting in and out some of the details that are on there. So you can use triplanar texturing, and then that actually does a texturing system from the left, right, top, and bottom. So it has more almost like a procedural kind of feel to it at that point. We've got edge smoothness. So if I take that down, I think that should make it a bit crunchier. And if we push this up, it's probably going to soften some of the transitions on here a little bit. And so I'll just put this down here. They also have ambient occlusion masking. So if we drag that up all the way, you can see it's going to knock out quite a bit of the information on there. And then we've got curvature weight. So it's using a couple different maps. When you use these things, you can tell down at the bottom the different maps that it's actually using to generate everything. So I think I'm going to be pretty good for this. The other thing is, if you want to invert it, you could click on the invert button on here, and that way it's basically doing the invert on the mask. But I'm going to leave it back on here right where we got it, and then at that point then I'm going to go here and then add a black mask. That's going to knock everything out, and then I'm just going to go back to our basic soft brush. If we wanted to use our custom one that we made, we'd have to go navigate to that, and we've got our custom softness on there. So maybe I just want to pull out some of these areas. I'm just going to make sure I'm painting with white into that mask, so we're good on that. Then maybe I just want to pull out certain areas here, so I just hit the bracket key to get that going. And so now I got some golds and now I'm painting maybe a little bit more silver on certain areas. Maybe I hit corners on there, maybe on the tops of these just a little bit. Maybe hit the corners of this. So it's going to lightly hit in through some of the areas. Kind of like this. And then maybe I'll hit along here and along here. And so then I think this should be enough for us to get an understanding of at least where the generators sit, and you can kind of play around with those, but that should at least give you some kind of new variation on some of these different parts, and kind of pulling out some of the detail and giving just a slightly different look on things. All right, in this part we're going to be just adding some what you can consider sun damage. So the very top of this is going to be hit by the sun more, so we want to get maybe more light on this particular area. So what I'm going to do, just like we've been doing before, make a new folder group and call this sun damage, like this. We're going to go ahead and make a new fill layer. Just call this sun. You can call it sun damage if you want. And it's going to click and drag this into this particular area like this. And the only thing we want is color. Let's take the roughness on here and we'll make it definitely less rough. We'll take the metallic off of it. And if we do this, let's just say it's going to kind of dull things up a bit like this. And I think for a color, I might do kind of a little bit of a yellowish, whitish kind of orange, maybe somewhere in there. Let's see if I push it this direction a little bit more. Let's see if I do metallic as well, just to kind of explore what that might look like. Yeah, so I think this, if I go this direction with it and put metallic on there and put the metallic all the way down, then it's got more of a clay feel to it. And I'll just push it right in here like this. So then I'm going to go ahead and add a white mask to this. So it shouldn't change anything at all. Then we're going to go to add a layer effect and use a generator. And then we're going to select a generator, and this time we're going to use this 3D distance generator. And what this should do for us is allow us to take a gradient. We can push it X, left or right. So if we put it on 0.5, it's going to be right in the middle. Position Y, if we push it all the way to 1, it's going to be all the way at the top. And if we push it down, it's going to be towards the bottom. So let's put it all the way at the top. And the position of Z is this direction going either to the forward part of this or towards the back of it. So we want that probably really close to the middle. Now we got a radius, and we can play around with how far out this thing pushes out. We also have an offset, which will push it in and out. It's kind of feels like the radius a little bit. Now with the contrast, if we drag the contrast up, we can do something like this. So if we put the contrast all the way up to 1, this could potentially help us to be able to understand visually what's going on. Now if I do the offset, I can push that out a bit more. So I'd like to get coverage of the entire thing. If we pull the radius back down like this, we've got that, and with the contrast we can maybe lessen that up a bit on there. And let's pull the radius back down, and then maybe drop this this contrast back down a bit. And I'm going to pull down the offset of this like that. Okay, this is one where I might add another folder group and then put this in here so we are being as non-destructive as possible. So this is going to give me the area that I want the most coverage. So I'm going to put a new folder group in here, push this in here like this, call this just sun folder or something like that. I don't think the name of that really matters too much. We can go ahead and make a white mask on this. And this is where, if you want, we could use some of the other techniques we've done before, use a bitmap mask, do all that. We could even use a new generator on here for this, and we could do a mask builder. We've got dirt on here. We haven't really done anything with dirt. Dirt's kind of cool. If we just throw that on there, if we hold down Alt and then click on it, you can see this kind of mask that it builds for that. So that's a pretty darn intense and cool kind of mask. Now this one's got all kinds of different parameters for this as well. So this could be a way that dirt was just seeping into some of the cracks and getting in there like that. So that's pretty cool. We got dirt contrast. So if we wanted to feel like it's kind of damaged everything and it's just kind of laying over the top of everything, we could do that. I could kind of pull this up and leave it there. Let's put it on the triplanar texture, and you can kind of see how it changes things whenever you put the triplanar texture on there. So really got to just kind of try these things out. We've got a grunge amount for everything that we can play around with. And I think I'm starting to get pretty happy with this. Maybe take the contrast up just a little bit more in there like that. And then now at that point, everything's contained within here, and then I can go here at the very top, that folder group, and then just make a new black mask. And then we've got control to be able to just go ahead and paint in. I'm going to control right click to make my brush size a bit larger. Now we've got the ability to just kind of paint in exactly where we want this to fall. Now I don't want to kill too much of the metallic effect that we've been working on. I think it's pretty good what we've got going on for that. So I think I might try to be maybe a little heavier handed with some of this stuff right in through here. Maybe on the top of this. I don't like that. I like the contrast that's in there. And again, you might shift right click to rotate your light around to kind of see how light is playing off these surfaces. Then just paint in just a little bit in here, like so. And so I think that's looking pretty good. We might go back to the dirt and then just adjust this up. I want to have that show up and be a little bit stronger. So I think that's looking pretty good, pretty decent at this point. Now we could always go with this damage that we've done. If we wanted, we could go back with our basic soft. And at this point, this one's got the pressure sensitivity for the size of this. So I'm going to tap X so I'm painting into the mask and taking some parts away. So if you wanted to have the appearance that maybe some of this got scratched off, we could do that. That's pretty darn strong though, so I'm going to hit undo for that. And then I'm going to go to our brush and take down the flow and make this a bit lighter like this. So now at this point, let's get this up just a little bit more. Yeah, and I think this is pretty nice at this point to be able to hand paint some of these. So if I'm just kind of random with some of this, maybe I'm just doing kind of a squiggle kind of pattern. And you got to be careful as we've got symmetry turned on here. Now as you cross like that, it's going to do this crossing pattern. Now if you want it to meet right in the middle, you're going to have to kind of be a little bit careful as you go across the center part. We could do some stuff like this. So I'm just trying to add just a little bit more artistic randomness to the pattern. So then we're able to do some hand painting and make some artistic choices at this point for what's going on. I actually like to do these smaller circles and then maybe do some dot patterns too, and that kind of helps break things up a little bit and gives some nice randomness to things. Like this. The other thing we could try to do, we could put height information on here and then just give it a 0.001 and hit enter. Let's see what we get. That's pretty low, so 0.005. I'm just trying to see if we could add just a little lip to this. So let's do 0.01 and see what that does at that point. Let's do 0.01. So that's adding quite a bit there at that point. You can see how it's starting to affect the surfaces and it's raised up quite a bit. So it's probably a bit too much. So if we just do just a slight amount like that, we could do that. And then I'll just tap X, and then maybe some of these lines are a little bit too strong at this point. So I'm just painting out just a little bit and just being very light and just kind of tapping. So I'm making kind of smaller dot patterns on this. So if we see anything that looks really just standing out a little bit too much and it's kind of producing a funny pattern to us, we can kind of just paint some of that material out. Okay. I want to make sure that wasn't doubling up any of this height information that was on there. So looks like we're good on that. So I think this is looking pretty interesting. Now it does feel a little bit heavier in here and not so much there. So I might go back to this basic soft and through here and then paint with white. Okay, let's just take a look at this. That's the 3D position. And so this is where I would need to paint into this. So I'll just paint into this map here. And I need to we'll get that custom brush that we made before on there. This one here. That's a little bit too heavy. So I'm going to hit undo. Just kind of lightly hit that. Okay, so I think that's starting to look pretty good. Tap X and make my brush size a lot smaller, and maybe I'll just paint some of this out right here because I kind of like these details that we have on this like ornate piece right here. And I think that should be pretty good for this part in this section. All right, the very last thing that we're going to add to this metal part is we're going to try to add some different areas where we've got maybe grease or soot or something kind of accumulated, and something that's maybe a bit more like an oily kind of surface and some of the damage that might do. So we're going to make another new folder group. We'll just call this grease, like this. And we'll make a new fill layer. throw it in here. Call this grease as well. Um, let's see, if we got height information, it's going to be really, really low, so 0.025. Let's just say something in that range. And we'll use roughness. We'll go ahead and say should be fairly low for that. It's going to have a bit maybe higher specular component to it, so somewhere in here. And then metallic, if we drag that up. Once we drag metallic up, we don't really need that much roughness on it. So we can knock this back maybe into this range right in here. And then I'm going to take this and make it a little bit darker, but I'm going to make this a multiply to darken. And then we'll take this and say pass through for this. So that gets really, really dark at that point. So I think if we're just here, even in this range, and then maybe we want it to be a little bit more rough like this, I think we're good to go at that point. So now we can go ahead and put a black mask on here. And then if we went and we painted with, let's just say the basic hard brush, and we started to paint this information, let's just pretend like we've got some accumulation and it's coming down in these cracks and through here. And so it feels like as we start to paint this is still not very dark, so we can drag that down, make it a bit darker. The height information seems really, really high to me, so let's do 0.0025 and get something like that. Maybe we'll have it come up a little bit. So this is where you gotta kind of play around with this, explore the numbers, and see visually what works. And we might not really need any height information at all. It's just I wanted to see what that would look like if we raise the surface up just a little bit. So we could definitely paint stuff like this, right? We could paint little tiny splatters if we wanted. Now we haven't really even explored a lot of the different brushes that they've got on there. There's tons of really cool brushes within here. Let's see, this one's, you can start to kind of see it a little bit. This one's got like a spotted kind of pattern on it. Now each brush is going to have their own thing as far as like the flow and everything. So you might have to go into each brush and explore a little bit what you're getting, what kind of results you're getting. Again, I just probably want something that's just like what we're painting before. Like if we get some kind of streaking information like this, and then if we wanted to paint some drips, we can just push down a little bit harder on the brush for our intensity. And as we get towards the bottom of this, maybe it pulls at the bottom a bit more. Now what I was thinking was maybe this might be kind of interesting to paint in this area with the wheels and these bolts that maybe have been sitting there, and then they kind of drip down a little bit. So don't go too heavy-handed with some of this stuff. We could end up producing something that just looks a little bit too unnatural. So we got this. I think it's gonna get a little bit more on the bottom down here. Now the cool thing about us doing this workflow that we got is if it's too strong, let's pull back out a little bit and see how it's reading from here. So I think that's working rather well. But again, if it's a bit too much, then we can always go back and then readjust some of this. And then at that point, if it's not too heavy-handed, we could be a little bit more free to paint and not worry about adding too much information that's gonna make it just feel really weird or odd. So we got some of this. Now I was going to show you that there's also in here, there's some different particle brushes, and these are actually really, really cool. Each one does something different. You've got something like rain, and if you control your brush size with this one, it's actually going to shoot a particle system down on there, and then it'll paint with these particles. It's really, really cool. It might be a little bit tough to get the kind of control that maybe you're hoping for, but for some of these more natural kind of patterns, you could do some pretty amazing and pretty interesting things with that for sure. Now, we did have this sitting here. We might want to move the sun damage on top. So don't forget that you could rearrange these things. So if we put the grease and we want that sun damage to go on top, now we might be able to be a little bit more free with what we're painting on this and let this just kind of streak up. Let it run down. And we got something like that. They've got heavy leaks and they've got leaks. So this could be something that's more like a localized thing. And this is pretty cool for, again, if something was like leaking out and it streaks down, we've got that. And then maybe we've done something like this in here. So we've got that. You might want to just do a combination of this along with just going back through and then doing your hand painted work on top of it. So then that way you've got complete control over everything. And then now at this point I can see that maybe I want to actually make this a bit darker. Maybe not too dark. I'll come back in through here. Now I can't see it too strongly in through there because the we did put the sun damage on top of it. So if we turn that off, we can see that that's going to be a bit heavier. And then I might come back through here and then just change the roughness value. I'm going to just see what this looks like as we rotate the light around and the kind of sheen that we're getting on this. And if it looks better, if it's matte. Now if it's matte, we get something like this as it rotates around. So it's always killing the specularity on it. So I guess it depends on if you want this to feel more like something that's been on the surface for quite some time, or something that maybe is just fresh and kind of oily at that time. So I'm going to tap X, and then I just feel like it's maybe a little bit too heavy-handed at times. Yeah, so I want something that's really hard edged like this. So I think that's looking kind of cool. And I'll tap X so I can paint into this a bit more. Like this, and then tap X to paint some of that out. Just kind of like that. Now that I've changed the specular values and everything else like that, this is really sticking out. So I'm gonna knock that back a bit as far as the value goes. So So it's going to paint in through there. And if we want to go back to the soft brush, we could do that. But again, every time we click on this, I've got to maybe take off some of the size information, and then it's really, really strong. That's why we just made that brush preset for ourselves, so I wouldn't have to do this every time. And I can knock this back just a little. And I'll drop this back. So I think that's starting to look pretty good. I'm starting to be happy with what we got. Now with this streak information, after we did the rain thing, maybe this height information is a little bit too much. So I might drop this down to 2.5 and then might actually even just kill it altogether. So if we want to kill it altogether, it's not really changing anything too much at that point. So I think I'll leave it. So I think I'm pretty happy right now with what we have as far as the metal goes. So you can see all the different layers that we made and what we've created. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to take a look at this layers property fill. I'm going to drag this back to the bottom. So we got our layers, and I'm going to collapse this up like this. And with the wood, I was going to go on the wood, open that up, and just change a little bit about the color information on here, just to maybe darken it up so we can concentrate and see on here. Now, one thing I didn't really tell you that I did with the background, at least in the viewport, if you go to edit settings and you go to the general area, you can do a gradient for the top on this if you wanted, or if you wanted to make them both one color, like you can make the bottom a little bit lighter if you want. So if you want a gradient, you can do that, or you could make them exactly the same colors like this. So it's possible that you could lighten the background if you wanted. And I'll do that. And I'll change this one to this like that and hit OK. So that's how you could change your background in the viewport if you want. And again, from the earlier session, I'll just hit save for this, so we can go into mode and we can go to iRay, or you can click this little camera icon, and if we've got our imported in cameras that we've got, we could take a look at those. And then so maybe we'll just throw it into iRay and then just see what the rendered results of that looks like inside of iRay. And then so you could start to kick out some nice shots from there as well. Obviously things change a little bit as we go into iRay, but it definitely gives you a very nice look. And I'll pause this for a second and let it finish running. Okay, here we are with the render all finished up, and it looks pretty good. So this will conclude this section on us taking a look at painting metals, and in the next section we'll be taking a look at how we can handle the wood area of the model, and we'll be using some very similar techniques, but obviously with a different material type we're going to have to approach it a bit differently. So we'll go ahead and get started in that in the next section.